Okay, the fact that we are doing this series, Signs and Wonders, Spiritual Gifts today, how does it make you feel? Just turn to the person next to you and say, this is how it makes me feel. Are you excited, terrified, perplexed, bemused? How does it make you feel? Okay, hands up, who is feeling really excited about doing spiritual gifts? Oh, that's about a bit more than the 11:30, not as many as the 9:30. Who is feeling slightly anxious? Yeah, a few of those. Who's feeling both? I'm feeling a little bit of both, if I'm honest. Now, why is it, if we have these extraordinary spiritual gifts like healing and prophecy and miracles, why do we so often in the church neglect those gifts? Why don't we practice them as we should? I think it's often down to the reality of church life, of the abuse of those spiritual gifts. All of us have horror stories, and as we were talking about preparing for this series with hub leaders, with PCC, with staff team, everybody had those moments of, yeah, but do you remember that time when? And, oh, God, it's so difficult when that happens or this goes wrong. Or we all have them. And so I thought, actually, it would be really good for us right at the beginning just to get all of those out of the open. Just to say, yeah, this is my horror story. So turn back to your neighbor that you were speaking to. If you're on your own, do try and find somebody, maybe join a table if you can, and say, actually, look, this is where it's been really difficult for me. It might be abuse. It might be somebody just, let me give you an example. Gwil's turn this time. So I was a teenager, and I was at the wrong end of the queue when we went forward for prayer. And so the guy was just getting it going. So he comes up to me, and he just goes... Yeah, it's all right, isn't it? And I was furious with him. And by the time he got down to this end, where Rachel is, he kind of went, and the person prayed for just rolled out like a carpet. Didn't get anywhere near them. I was so cross. But my brother, who was 2 rows down from me, he'd had a spiritual experience. God had knocked him down, and I went back and said, God, you had a good moment. The guy smacked me in the forehead. And Ryan said, oh, he smacked me in the forehead too. And it was like, right, well, how far along did you have to go until suddenly people started just to fall over? Because that's what they'd seen already happening. Crazy. We all have stories like that. What are yours? Perhaps for you, it's more about, actually, I've been prayed for and prayed for and prayed for. Nothing's ever happened. Share your story of disappointment. Say where you're at. Okay? So just a couple of minutes. Go for that. Okay, lots of stories. Just wrap them up if you can. They take some telling, don't they? Do you know what's amazing? That's easy for us to forget. It was just the same in the early church. It was just the same in the church in Corinth when Paul writes this first letter that we're going to be looking at in a moment. The Corinthian church, they abused spiritual gifts. And the fascinating thing is, what's Paul's response to that abuse? Does he say to them, right, guys, stop using spiritual gifts? It isn't that. It isn't disuse. It's right use rather than abuse. It's use, not abuse. So what I want us to do as we think about using spiritual gifts is set some ground rules to say, actually, if we're going to do this well, if we're going to create a safe environment in which we can practice spiritual gifts together in a healthy way, how do we do that? What do we need to put in place? And we're going to read 1 Corinthians 12, and then we're going to look at 5 things together. So if you want to grab your Bibles, there's some on the tables. I'd encourage you to do that. We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. If somebody wants to shout me a page number, that would be great. Let's see. Draw your swords. See how fast. What? 1153. 1153. That's pretty good. That was close between Gwil and Rachel. That's what we like to see. Staff team hitting it. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 1. This is why we're doing this. Now about the gifts of the Spirit, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be uninformed. That's why we're doing this series. You know that when you were pagans, somehow or other you were influenced and led astray to dumb idols. Therefore I want you to know that no one who is speaking by the Spirit of God says, Jesus be cursed, and no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Spirit. There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in everyone, it is the same God at work. Now, to each one, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. Now, notice that bit, because I'm going to ask you about that in a minute. Okay? Those few verses. To one, there is given through the Spirit a message of wisdom, to another a message of knowledge by the means of the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by that one Spirit, to another miraculous powers, to another prophecy, to another distinguishing between spirits, to another speaking in different kinds of tongues, and to still another the interpretation of tongues. All these are the work of one and the same Spirit, and He distributes them to each one just as He determines. Just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slaves or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. And so the body is not made up of one part, but of many. Now if the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts of the body, every one of them, just as He wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. The head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. And the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. But God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Now, you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. And God has placed in the church, first of all apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then miracles, then gifts of healing, of helping, of guidance, of different kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all have gifts of healing? Do all speak in tongues? Do all interpret? Now, eagerly desire the greater gifts. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So 5 things we're going to look at tonight. In different ways, 5 parameters, 5 ways in which we can have a healthy, safe environment in which to explore spiritual gifts. Tools, not trophies. Everyone, not elites. Together, not alone. Now, not then. Nurture, not neglect. Hopefully easy to remember. First one, tools, not trophies. Verse 4, there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. You see, the problem was, at its root, the fact that the Corinthians valued some gifts more than others. They loved the spectacular. They called themselves spiritual. Those things that were up front, in your face. The Greek word is pneumatic. That's what they valued. And it was about status, kudos. These gifts that they had, they were like spiritual trophies. You know, like the scouts used to have, arms of badges. I had like 5 armfuls that my mum was just brilliant at getting me. She said, yes, he has sewed a patch on his knee. It's that kind of thing. You can get your sewing badge. And there it was. And I had hundreds of them. And the Corinthians treated it just like that. And that's the problem that Paul tackles first. And he does it in a really interesting way. I want you to look at verse 1, because he starts with their language. You don't really see it in our Bibles. It says, now about the gifts of the Spirit, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be uninformed. The word there doesn't say gifts of the Spirit. It says spiritual things or spirituals, pneumatikon. That was their language. When they heard the word pneumatikon, they thought, the spectacular, the supernatural. That's what they valued. But then Paul introduces new language to them, language that he wants them to use. And you can see 4 terms in verses 4 to 7. What I'd love you to do in your groups is just have a look at those 4 verses, 4, 5, 6, 7, and just identify the 4 terms that Paul uses. And why do you think he uses those 4 terms? Okay? 4 minutes, quick, here we go. Verses 4 to 7 of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, 4 terms that he uses to describe these phenomena. What are those terms? And why does he use them? Who's got the first one? Verse 4. Gifts. Okay, good. Who's got the second one in verse 5? Service. Okay. Third one, verse 6. Workings. Fourth one, verse 7. Okay, so we've got some Greek words coming up, which is good. So the first one, gifts, is where we get the word charismatic, charismata from. Why does gifts matter? Why is it important that it's from God, not from within ourselves? Not our power, that's right. It's something we ought to be grateful for, isn't it? Not jealous of. You know, my 3-year-old is amazing at going, I have a really nice chocolate cake, but you have Smarties. I don't want my chocolate cake, I want those Smarties because you've got them. It's easy to be jealous, isn't it, of what other people have. But if it's a gift from God, it's something we need to be grateful for. It doesn't matter whether it is helps or healing, whether it is administration or prophecy, whether it is mercy or miracles. They're all gifts from God. Okay, what's about verse 5? Ministries. The Greek word there is diakonia, where we get acts of service. Why does that matter? For others. Perfect. Third, what was it? Workings. The Greek word there is energamaton, where we get the word energies. So it's about the power of God at work through us. Similar point to the first one, isn't it? It's all about God. It's not about us. It's His power, not us. And what about number 7, manifestations, phanerosis? What's that saying? This is a bit more subtle, I think. It is for the common good, so purpose really matters in that. But the manifestation will look different in each one of us, but it's from the one Spirit. So even though the Spirit will reflect, the manifestation of the Spirit will reflect something of our character, something of our idiosyncrasies, our little quirks, even our failings and our mess, still the Spirit can be revealed through all of those things. So 4 key words that Paul wants us to understand, because spiritual gifts are tools, not trophies. Second thing, Paul says spiritual gifts are for everyone, not elites. Look at verse 7. We just heard it. Now, to each one, the manifestation is given for the common good. Paul wants the Corinthians to understand that everyone has access to spiritual gifts. It's not just the apostles. It's not just the super spiritual. It's not just the saints, those who are mature, experienced, or holy. We live in the age of the Spirit. The prophecy of Joel, spoken hundreds of years before Jesus, that one day I will pour out my Spirit on all people and your sons and daughters will prophesy, has happened. Peter, on the day of Pentecost, says, this, what you see before you now as the Spirit breaks out, is that. This is the fulfillment of that prophecy. And Paul's use of this beautiful image of the body here is all about that, isn't it? There are presentable parts, and there are private parts. But they're all necessary. So there's no place for envy. There's no place for disappointment in the kingdom of God, because everyone gets to play. That is one of our values here at St. Peter's. Now, what does that look like, do you think, in practice? Well, the beauty of Paul's letters is you see what that looks like on the ground, in reality. in concrete terms. We're going to be looking at chapter 12 and chapter 14 throughout most of this series. Look at chapter 14 for me, verse 26. Just turn over to it. And what you see there is a glimpse of the early church, what it was like. It's like Paul has pulled back the curtain for us, and we can see what a gathering of New Testament Christians look like. And this is what he says. When you come together, each of you has a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Everything must be done so that the church may be built up. Everyone gets to play. Spend a minute, just turn to the person next to you and say to them, this is the part that I'm going to play. This is the gift that I want to pursue in this series, that I can edify the church with. Go for it, just 30 seconds. What's on your heart? Gut, go for it. Okay, anybody want to speak in tongues? Next couple of weeks? Healing? Anybody want to practice gift of healing? A couple of people, that's good. It might be good to go for a few more than that. It can be a place of healing. How about prophecy? Yeah, word of knowledge? What?
Words of insight.
Words of insight. I kind of think that's kind of wisdom, word of wisdom. It's a bit like discernment of spirits. We've got a good coverage. Miracles. Anybody pushing out for miracles? Yes, go on. Yeah, I like it. I like it. Okay, so that's because it's everyone, not elites. Really important. So you don't at all feel unworthy of saying, I want the gift of miracles. I want to pray for healing. Next point. We do this together, not alone. Verse 27 now of chapter 12. Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. That you are the body is us. It's plural. It's all of us together. Paul here is emphasizing corporate worship. This is not primarily about individual or private devotion. Do you know the phrase, when you come together, occurs 7 times just in chapters 11, 12, 13, and 14. 7 times. This is his key emphasis. The Corinthians, you see, were divided. They had their favorites. They had their spiritual tribes. They had their spiritual superstars, their cliques that they belonged to. And Paul is saying an essential ingredient of church life, if you want to see a church that is truly charismatic, that's truly exercising the gifts of the Spirit, is that we do that together in unity and love with one another. And so this gathering together, this congregation of the people of God is essential. The context of worship is essential if we want to create that safe space where spiritual gifts can flourish. We want to create this context of family. We talk about that a lot, don't we? It's important. It's why we do Sundays. It's why we're gathering together on Wednesdays as St. Peter's Central. Because if we want to practice spiritual gifts, we do that together, not alone. Next point. Now, not then. We're nearly there. Verse 13 of chapter 12. For we were all baptized by one Spirit. Some of you may have heard others say that spiritual gifts are not for the church today. For those who come from perhaps a bit more of a Catholic tradition, you talk a lot about the authentication of the apostolic witness. The apostles preached the gospel and signs and wonders followed them. But when the church was established, you didn't need those signs and wonders anymore, and so they began to ebb away and finally to disappear. But of course, the record of the early church says for the first 4, 5, 6, 7 centuries, gifts were expected and common. Great saints like Augustine and Athanasius talked about healing and miracles as if they were normal. It doesn't really stack up. 1,000 years later, in the Protestant Reformation, as they were reacting against medieval superstition and emphasizing scriptural authority, the Bible as the Word of God, they argued that the gift stopped after the formation of the canon of the Bible. After this, all these books were agreed by the church and came together. And they used chapter 13 of this letter as part of their argument, where there is tongues, they will be ceased. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. And they argue that was the words of Scripture. But actually, you read that for a moment and look at the context and what it's saying, and it's clearly the return of Christ. Has he come back yet? No. Are we still the church? Yes. Are we still living in the age of the Spirit? Yes. Are we filled with the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead, that empowered him to do the miracles that he did? Yes. Are we filled with the same Spirit that empowered the apostles to allow them to witness to the resurrection of Jesus Christ? Yes, we are. That's Paul's point. So the same gifts that they were endowed with, we can be endowed with too, because we share that one same Spirit. Any questions about that? Are we okay with that? Yeah. Okay. Now, not then. It's good. Last point then. Nurture, not neglect. Look at this verse, last verse. I love it. Paul's a crazy man. Now eagerly desire the greater gifts. These Corinthians, they were out of control. Paul in chapter 1 says, you guys, you're famous for your spirituality. You were renowned for your spectacular super spirituality. It was exciting. It was vibrant. It was supernatural. They were gifted. There was no doubt about that. But it had gone wrong. Abuse had crept in. Prophets were walking around making power plays. There were these ecstatic tongue speakers who were showing off, or babbling away, and no one had any idea what they were saying. But they were just showing that they were spiritual. They had access to knowledge that no one else had. And Paul's response to all of that going on is fascinating to me. Because he doesn't suggest what I would probably suggest, which would be a temporary moratorium. I would say, guys, let's stop for a minute. Let's catch our breath. Let's perhaps take our foot off the pedal. Let's slow down. Let's ease off. He doesn't say that. He says, eagerly desire the greater gifts. It's kind of pouring petrol onto the flames, isn't it? He refuses to say, do it less. Instead, he says, do it right. He recognizes, you see, that the problem is not spiritual gifts. They are gifts from God. The problem is unspiritual, immature believers. So suppressing spiritual zeal is just never, ever going to be the answer. And the truth is that using spiritual gifts is messy. We need to be ready for that. They come with different levels of intensity. The New Testament is quite clear about that. Sometimes they can be quite strong and powerful. We had a prophetic word this morning which really resonated, so much so that Jason repeated it at the 11:30. I can remember it really clearly now. And you might have had that experience. Somebody might have spoken a word over you which was so clear and accurate that it had to be God. They're like reading your mail. You know that experience when that happens? But there'll be other times when somebody steps out and gives a word and you think, oh, that was lovely. But it was something like, you are a rose in God's garden. You know that kind of word? And it's like, it's not. Anybody could almost say that, really. But that doesn't matter because they're stepping out and they're encouraging you with something that they feel God has laid on their heart. And that's as much as they can manage at the moment because they're learning and practicing. And you know, that's okay, isn't it? There are different levels of maturity as well when it comes to practicing spiritual gifts. And sometimes we make mistakes and we get it wrong. So Paul is wise in this. He says to the Romans in chapter 12, verse 6, use your gift in accordance with your faith. If you've got a lot of faith, go for it. Push it hard. If you've got a little bit of faith, take the first step. See what it's like. Try it out. My 3-year-old has a 5-year-old sister and a 8-year-old sister. That means she thinks she's an 8-year-old. And so she will try things that she really ought not to. Sometimes it works brilliantly. So she's now cycling without stabilizers at the age of 3, which is just miraculous, and I love it. But there are other times where she suddenly finds herself kind of hanging off the bars, in the playground, 5 feet off the floor, and she's like, and I'm the other end of the playground, hammering towards her before she falls. So use your gift. Don't do that. Don't be Anastasia. Use your gift in accordance with your faith. But then the other side of that is don't take your gifts for granted. It's really interesting reading Paul's correspondence with his disciple Timothy. In his second letter to him, he says to him, you need to fan into flame the gift that was within you. Somehow Timothy had neglected that gift. Maybe he had received a bit of pushback from different people in the congregation. He was a bit young. Who was he to use these kind of gifts? And so he just stopped using them, put them on the back burner and begun to neglect them. So Paul says, stir it up. Rekindle that gift. Flex your spiritual muscles. Make use of it. Practice. Because we need to nurture, not neglect our spiritual gifts. And I hope that's what we're going to be doing in these next 8 weeks. So just to wrap all of this up, we've all heard our horror stories of excess and neglect and disappointment and abuse. Weirdness even, just plain old weird. And we want this here, don't we, to be a safe place. The image that came to mind was of a children's playground, which is a great place to enjoy yourself, to explore, to take risks, but to do it in a way that minimizes danger. So there are clear parameters and boundaries. There's a good kind of soft landing. You've got space to play, space to explore. Because what I want us to do, just to move to another picture that I heard about 15 years ago, and God has been just laying it back on my heart recently. It's so easy for us, isn't it, to live the Christian life as if we're living in an aircraft hangar. And we're blown away by the size of this gigantic building. And we can explore the aircraft hangar, and we can see all the different rooms, and we can wonder at the main space and all the different planes that are in the hangar. And we think, what a great place to live and do life. And then one day, somebody opens the huge doors of the hangar, and we step outside. And our eyes go from the hangar to the new horizon. And we see the vast canopy of the blue sky and realize how much more there is available to us in this life that God offers us. That is my prayer for us as a church in this season, that we'll step out of the aircraft hangar into a new horizon. And to ensure that we do that well, 5 things to remember. Tools, not trophies. Everyone, not elites. Together, not alone. Now, not yet. And nurture, not neglect.